Hopefully you're prepared to take a lot of notes. And if you're not, go ahead and grab some paper and pen or a digital device that you can take notes on now. Is everybody familiar with what it means when I say direct access? Like in the IFS model? Okay, so we're going to actually be doing that today. I'm going to be speaking to a couple of your parts. And Allison's going to be facilitating this with me at some point in the future, but she's going to be a participant today. We're going to be using direct access today. And so for that reason, Allison's got a couple of props there to show you what she's going to use to represent those two parts of herself. They look like twins. How do you tell them apart, Allison?
Oh, see, this one sits and this one's laying down.
Okay. The main thing is that you know the difference.
I know the difference.
And I'll give you just a little bit of coaching around that when we get to that point. Hopefully you brought an idea of an internal conflict that you've been dealing with. And hopefully that internal conflict's not too on fire and not too hot. We don't want it to be too activating, because really the main thing that we want to accomplish today is to show you a method that you can use when you have internal conflict for being able to mediate that. And another thing I want you to know is that this is coaching and not therapy. We're using IFS, but we're not doing therapy. That means a couple of things. One of them is that we're not going to go in real deep. And another thing is that we're going to go quick. We're going to go real quick. And you're going to be answering about 20 questions in 25 minutes. So be prepared for that. And let's have fun. Just hold it lightly. And I'll be asking for interaction if you want to participate by raising your hand, being on screen, answering questions. I'd love that. If you're not comfortable with that's okay too. You can just let this be your own experience. And so without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump in and get started. This is obviously not confidential since it's going to be recorded. Does everybody have a couple of objects in front of them? And if not, find something around you, just two different things. Allison showed us her two stuffed puppies. I've got a stapler and a tape dispenser here. You're actually going to be either focusing on those as you answer these questions so that you can remember which part of your speaking that is speaking through you. That the first thing that we need you to do is to focus on what are the two positions, and then you want to assign those two positions to those two different objects. So whatever your conflict is, and you might want to just write a description here. Take 20, 30 seconds and write a description. What is that internal conflict? And then describe the position of the part that's going to represent one side of this conflict. You may have several parts that are, behind one side and the other side of this conflict. So ask for one part that will be the spokes part for the one position. Let's call that part A. And then we're going to have a part B, which will be the spokes part for the other position in your conflict. Is this making sense so far? Okay, so I'm going to just be quiet for about 60 seconds as you describe those two positions. Obviously, you're not going to be able to go into a lot of detail, just enough to represent those two positions. So now I'm going to ask you to grab the object and either hold on to it or have it right front and center so you can see it. And then I'd like to speak to that part. Let's start with part A. And I'm going to speak directly to that part. My first question for you is, am I speaking to that part? Okay. I'm going to set a timer for 60 seconds, and I'm going to ask you now, as part A, please describe your position. In 60 seconds, describe your position and argue for it as much as you can in 60 seconds. And write that down. Okay. The next question for you, part A, is what's important to you about your position, the position that you hold on this conflict? What is important to you about the position that you hold? Okay, next question for part A. What concerns you that your position addresses? Another way to say it, what are the concerns you have that your position answers or addresses? What concerns you that your position addresses? And this is the last question before we're going to move to part B. Here we go. What should be done? That's the question. What should be done? So thank you, part A. We're going to move to part B now. So as the participant here in the workshop, I'd like you to set aside part A and then grab part B. And I'm imagining it's maybe difficult to actually hold on to it, but put it front and center in front of your attention. And now I'm going to ask you to speak from part B. Am I speaking with part B? Holding the opposite position or the other position? Great. So different sets of questions here. Using your notes for the answers, look at the answers that part A had. And now for 60 seconds, review and see what it is that you, part B, understand about what is important to part A. Make some notes if you need to, but at least review it. 60. By the way, part B, you will have a chance to answer those same questions. But for now, just look. See what you understand about part A and what is important to them in their position. Okay, so you just reviewed what you now understand about what is important to part A and the position that they hold. So part B, what do you now understand about the concerns of part A? Review again the answer to that question. What are the concerns of part A? What do you understand about that? And you have 60 seconds. Part B, what do you understand about what part A wants done? I'm not asking if you approve or agree, just what do you understand about what part A wants done? And take 60 seconds to clarify what you understand. One more question about part A before we switch over to ask you those same questions, part B. And that is, can you appreciate the position of part A? That's a yes or no, so I'm going to ask you to expand on that a bit. If you can appreciate, what is it you appreciate about the position of part A? If you cannot, just note that. If you can't find an appreciation for the position of part A, just note that you can't. All right, part B now. I want to hear from you. What is your position regarding this inner conflict? What is your position? Take 60 seconds to argue for it. Describe it the best you can. Part B, what is important to you about your position? I'll say it again. What is important to you about your position, part B? So take 60 seconds to describe what concerns you that your position addresses. What concerns do you have that your position addresses? And here's the last question, part B. What should be done? 60 seconds to describe what should be done. All right, thank you, part B. Shifting now, go ahead and set aside your object for part B, and then grab the object for part A again. I'm going to ask you to allow part A to speak through you to me. And now, part A. Am I speaking to part A? Yeah, great. Part A, what do you understand about what's important to part B? Take a look at the notes that have been taken. You've got 60 seconds to study those. Maybe make some notes yourself about what you understand that's important to part B. Part A, you've just summarized and reviewed what you understand about what's important to part B. Now take a look and review and write about what you understand about the concerns of part B. And you have 60 seconds. What do you understand about the concerns of part B? Okay, next question for part A. What do you understand about what part B wants done? Part B, wants something done. What do you understand about that? One last question before we shift again. For part A, can you appreciate the position of part B? And if you can, describe what you can appreciate about the position of part B. And if you can't, just make a note of that. All right, now setting both objects off to the side, I just want to talk to you for a minute as a participant in the workshop here. All right, we are at the halfway mark right now, and I'm committed to ending the workshop at exactly the time that I said that I needed from you. So I want to take maybe 5 minutes right now for anything you'd like to share about this experience that you're having so far, any comments you have. And I'm not so concerned about the process itself, but I'd really be interested in hearing from you. What's the impact so far on giving your parts an opportunity to speak and be heard? Shalini, we'll start with you.
Yeah, hi. So I had chosen two parts. One was that wants to complete writing all my session notes soon after the sessions, and one which feels lazy and likes to take rest, and then sometimes it gets pushed till the end of the day, sometimes the next day, and then I forget some of the nuances, and I don't like that because I rely a lot on my notes. These were the two parts. So it was a very interesting exercise.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks, Shalini. Daniel.
And so the thing that I noticed at least halfway into it was the similarity between my two parts. One part was how I like being in a mode of kindness and generosity and support, and the other in a mode of pushback when I feel like I'm being pulled into conflict and tension. And what I discovered is that both, under different circumstances, wanted the same thing. Just throw that out there.
That's so interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
They seem to be opposed, and yet they both have the same concerns, really, when it boils down to it. Yeah.
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 Surprised me.
Yes. Thanks, Daniel. And is it Anna or Anna?
So I had a bit of an issue when you said about one part to write down what you understand from the point of view of the other part. So for me, it was extremely not communicative, like very closed out. And so I was wondering if you maybe would have some suggestions what to do in this situation, because I literally couldn't write anything down because the one part didn't want to hear anything about it.
Oh, interesting. So let me see if I understand. When it came time to reflect back on what the opposing part understood about the other part, there was no understanding because the other part didn't want to know.
It was, for example, a child who wants something or doesn't want something.
Right.
Whatever you say to them, they don't care. They were just like, ah!
Yeah.
Ah!
I'm curious, that part that didn't want to hear anything, just wanted to be heard. Do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, or just, I have my point of view and I don't care.
And I don't care about yours. And had that part, when that happened, had that part had a chance yet to be heard?
What do you mean?
We started with part A and we heard their position, their concerns, what was important and what they wanted to have done. Was this your part B that was asked?
Oh, yeah, yes, it was.
So in other words, part B hadn't been heard from yet.
Yeah.
Did you notice any shift once part B was heard from?
Because we went to the part A back, so I'm not sure, we didn't go back to the part how it felt after that. So it's hard for me to say. Probably if I would start from the opposite, it would be different. Not sure.
Yeah. So if there's a suggestion at all, it would be that, even though you've already gone through this and answered these questions from both of these parts, you might now check with part B to see, would part B be willing to now listen from a place of trying to understand part A now that part B's been heard. Is that helpful?
I think so.
Okay. Obviously, we're not going to have time for you to do that in this workshop, but I want to suggest that you do it afterwards. And I will provide later today a link to the video so you can watch it again and walk through the process again, if should you choose to do that.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Anna. And one more, Rachel.
Thanks. It's Rachel, actually. It's
Oh,
pronounced a little different than it looks. All good. I had a third part show up, like towards the end of that, of part, was it part A talking about part B? Then all of a sudden there was a part C. And
Ah,
I'm like, oh, okay. And then it threw everybody else off. So I'm just not sure. Just wanted to name that. I'm not really sure what to do with C right now.
it's hard to know that's going to happen unless it's clear and obvious and right up front. And so I apologize. My intention was to say right from the beginning that choose an internal conflict that's between two factions, two positions. But as you point out, you didn't even know that until you got into the process and the third part showed up. And
Yeah.
if we weren't time limited, what you would be able to do would be to just expand the same process and give every part an opportunity both to be heard and to express what they understand about the others. There might be even 4 or 5 parts in some cases. Most of the time, would you all agree that most of the time the conflict's going to be between two factions, maybe two parts or two constellation of parts represented by one part, spokespart.
I thought it was one constellation of parts represent. I thought part A was like a kind of coming together.
Yes.
They had the same opinion, and then apparently not so much. Interesting.
One more question I have for you, and see if I get your name right. Rahel?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. What shifted for you in your system so far in this process?
I listened to part B more clearly than I had been listening to part B. I think I've been defaulting to part A, and then part C a little bit is also part of the default, but part B was getting more airtime.
Yeah. And did that bring about more understanding?
I guess it just made something very plain and just simple instead of like really confusing and hard to digest. Like it was like, okay, here it is, if that makes any sense.
It does. We're going to move to this next piece, and I'm going to suggest for you and for anybody else that had a third or fourth part show up, these next 2 questions you're going to have a couple of minutes each for. I'm only going to have enough time to give 2 of the parts an opportunity to answer the question. So you may want to take time later and complete it for that third part, or try to squeeze it into this 2 minutes each that I'm providing. So let's go ahead and shift again now. Thanks for the questions and the comments. I don't know about you, but I'm having a lot of fun here. This is great. I'm enjoying this. Go now to part A. We haven't heard from part B for a while, but we will here in a moment. Grab part A again, put that front and center, let part A know that they now have an opportunity to speak directly to me. Am I speaking to part A? Great, thank you. Here's the question that I have for you, part A. What would you need to move toward the middle or toward the position of part B? What would you need to move toward the middle or toward the position of part B? Consider, and you might need to look at the notes for part A. You might want to review notes part A and see what was written down about your concerns and what was important to you about this. That might help you to know what you would need to move toward the middle. All right, thank you, part A. I'm going to shift to part B here. So participant, if you'll just set your object that represents part A off to the side, grab the object for part B, focus on that. And I'd like to speak to part B. Am I speaking to part B now? Okay, great. So part B, you're going to have a couple minutes to answer this question, and you may have heard me ask part A. It's the same question. What would you need to move toward the middle or toward the position of part A? And you might want to refer to the notes taken when you answered the questions about what was important to you about your position and what your concerns are. Might help you to answer this question. The question again is, what would you need to move toward the middle or toward the position of part A? Thank you, part B. All right, we're down to about 16 minutes here. And I just would like to take one person that would volunteer to tell us about what parts A and parts B needed to be able to soften and move toward the middle. Would someone volunteer to share what you noticed, what you heard? Shalini, again, thank you.
I noticed that they both said something similar, and I was surprised. So, yeah, that's what I noticed. I didn't think it would be similar. Like, they both said, take it a little lightly and be a little kinder. Yeah.
They both said that they could lighten up a little.
Yeah, lighten up. Don't take it so seriously. Don't make it like one big ordeal.
Yeah, don't take it so serious. Yeah, that's great. Okay, thank you, Shalini. Yeah, and Marty. Dr. Martin Kettlehut.
Just to give you a little tiny bit of background, the part A doesn't want exposure, doesn't want to have to argue or defend. It feels very risky. Part B wants to publish a book on a topic that's going to draw a lot of attention and exposure and risk, and feels very passionate and committed to getting that message out. So what part A said how it would move toward B's position, if it could be somehow guaranteed safety and support, and maybe learn detachment. And then part B, in order to move toward part A's position, said, let's look for a strategy to keep A safe and still get the message out.
Nice. Marty, let me stay with you for just a second. And when that mutual compromising and willingness showed up, were you able to notice any kind of a shift internally? Or if maybe you can notice now?
Yeah, very much. There was a settling. There was an ability to breathe deeper. And 2 new questions came up to look at, because I realized that the topic itself, like part of B's complaint about A, if it's not something you asked, is that A is not representing the topic, which is leadership. Come on, be a leader, B is saying to A. And then the other thing that I noticed is that A has a very strong distaste for that, the marketing, the self-promotion and all of that.
Yeah. Great. More questions to explore then. That's a great segue to what I want to say next, that each of you had your own experience just now and something shifted or something did not. Maybe there was a minor shift, maybe there was a major shift, maybe you had a big insight, maybe, as Marty just talked about, it raises more questions that need to be explored. If in fact you have found compromise from even one of your parts, I want to make sure that you take a moment and summarize what that compromise is in the form of an agreement. Part A agrees to this, part B agrees to that, and these are the conditions for those agreements. And I'm going to give you a full 3 minutes to summarize the agreement that you've arrived at, if in fact you have. If you haven't arrived at an agreement, then take this 3 minutes to write down the other questions that need to be explored. Okay. Once again, my timekeeper part just is so happy right now that we've completed the process of the workshop that I wanted to deliver, and that leaves us enough time to hear from a couple of you maybe about your experience and your value that you got out of this process. And there's one question that gives you room to just tell me in your own words, as many words as you want to use, how this was for you and maybe suggestions that you have. But for now, who would like to share, who would be willing to share the impact that this process had for you?
I actually really having the objects in front of me because it's tactile, and I think it's a great reminder for me on my desk. So I think that's very easy to apply it, continuously. So that was quite, for me, it was more easy to connect on a tactile level. So I have my part A more like a constellation of parts. So I got my caregiver part, my teenage part, I have a few body parts, and a young adult part. And my group B was actually my manager parts, my critical parts, my rational parts, and anger part. That was just the emotions that I got through the questions. And for me, I think the compromise and the summary of what these two parts are noticing, these two group of parts, they're still discussing, but it's interesting because I think this has been, of course, carrying on for a long time internally. It's just, I agree with some of the participants sharing, there's some kind of similarities, but there are quite a lot of differences as well. I'm happy to notice that there's like beliefs that some of the parts are holding on to, which they are more willing to look at, adjust these beliefs, adjust the expectations on themselves and on me. So it's good. They are actually not fighting too much, but they're just like feeling stuck for a long time. I'm actually quite happy to run through this internal process because it's helping me to notice I could just look forward to build up more of that creativity aspect of myself and take smaller steps, getting more support, getting more advice, reaching out more, connecting more, which I feel it's like going towards those 8 C's as well. So it's very meaningful for me. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing all that. Yeah. A couple of things that you said have me wanting to share a couple things too. And one is, let's just acknowledge that the concerns of parts A and B, or other parts that showed up as well, really are going to boil down to exiles. Protectors do what they do because they have exiles to manage, control, and protect. And ultimately, where this is going to go for this conflict to be fully resolved, where it's not using up your energy, your internal energy, is for that exile to be unburdened. Obviously, this process doesn't do that. But what it does is introduces you more and helps you to understand these protectors more. And the next invitation may be to spend more time with them. And for that reason, if in your answers, in the answers that your parts provided about what would be needed, what would you need in order to move toward the middle, take a look at how they answered that and see if you can notice how their answers really point to an exile, an internal wound that's being managed. And if it serves you to do, and if it makes sense to you and your parts to do, I want to suggest that you set an intention to continue to get to know these protectors and continue to expand the possibility that you may be able to access eventually the exile. And if you need some assistance in continuing to explore with the protectors, I'll be sending you, along with a link to this video, I'll send you a modified version of a protector's exploration guide that I use in my self-led results coaching program. My clients tell me that it's very useful. It's the same questions, but it's built in with some coaching around it and lots of room to go with your own intuitive curiosity as you explore and get to know these protectors. And of course, when it's time, you probably don't need me to say this, but I'll say it anyhow. When it's time to get with that exile, you may want to consider either trading a session with a trained IFS practitioner, if you're one yourself, or actually hiring an IFS practitioner to help you work as you get closer and closer to that exile. Or even now, if you want help getting to know the protectors. So with 2 minutes remaining, I'm going to ask Alison maybe to give a summary of maybe what you've experienced and what you've seen here, if you're willing to, Alison.
Yeah, it was interesting because my parts on the surface were really superficial and they want me to keep it private and I will, but it was such a rich, deep conversation because it took me straight to the exile. And both parts were amenable to, both of them said, you need to go to the exile. You need to heal the wound so that we don't have to do our jobs. And they were pretty clear on that. both sides were willing to work with me on that. So it was interesting to me. I was really struck with how something seemingly so small and silly in my mind took me a whole lot deeper than I ever imagined going. And I also appreciated Wei Ling when she was talking about part A and part B represented a group of parts, because I think that's really important, because that was for me as well. There's a group of parts that work for this one particular goal for A and B both. And I think that's a really good point to make, that it's, for me anyway, it's rarely one part. It's a constellation of parts, because they are protecting an exile. It usually takes more than one protector to do so. I found it very helpful.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody, for showing up and volunteering your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rest of your day. Take
Thank
care.
you, Bill.
Thanks. Bye.